Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Matthew Struck with WhyLibertarian. We got another episode with a great libertarian here who is going to be sharing their story as to their background and why they're a libertarian. Nick Lamparelli is joining us from, are you in Boston today, Nick?
No, I moved to Naples, Florida.
Oh, wow, fantastic. So you traded in winter, basically, is what you did.
I traded a bad winter for a bad summer.
Yeah.
And given that it's early September, I'm now thinking, oh, I'm not sure if that was a good idea.
Yeah. Well, my next question was going to be, I have a bunch of professional contacts that are kind of like in the panhandle.
Yeah.
How did you guys manage with Sally that just rolled through?
So I've been very fortunate so far this hurricane season. All three that have approached the Florida coastline have basically tiptoed around us. Sally was the only one that we actually felt. So it got a little windy, nothing significant, but man, it poured.
Oh, yeah.
Like the storm blew up right off the coast where we are, and it went from, just a little bit of drizzle to all day Sunday, torrential rain. I think we got 12 inches in 24 hours. So that's the extent. So I feel very fortunate because I see what everybody else is going through.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. We talked about a little bit of the wildfire situation in my last one that we did with Sean Osborne out in California. So it's like this is, a reoccurring thing, and not to bore anyone who'd be watching or anything like that, but Nick and I know each other through basically the insurance and risk management industry. So this is something that we do on a day-to-day basis as far as our conversation. But I promise you, we won't afflict you with that today.
I think there's a connected dotted line to climate change and things like that. Like, so
Yes.
Why libertarian? Like, my libertarian stances affect how I behave, but it also affects what I think the potential solutions are. So,
right.
I'm sure we'll get into this, but whether you're a vehement believer, like climate change is this thing, it's just like, I still think the libertarian view on how to solve that is superior.
Yeah.
We'll get into details, I'm sure, but I think there are parallels there.
Yeah, no, we could totally dig into it. A lot of our back and forth, just kind of like in chat leading up to this, really focused on, and you could correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but a lot of it really focused on personal agency, right? Just the idea of you are the master of your own destiny in a way, and that there needs to be a results-based element to just life. Right. Regardless of whether you're talking about politics or not. Am I characterizing that perspective well?
Completely.
Okay.
To me, I find it illogical. If you believe in free will, then why, if there's free will, so if there's a God, if there's a spiritual being that is giving us free will, why should that free will be contained by a human form God, like a government or something like that? It seems inconceivable to me that those two things can sort of coexist. So I believe in free will. I believe in human agency, that the individual has an incredible amount of deep resources that they can lean on, and that sort of informs or kind of guides me in terms of the rest of my philosophical approach, because I don't understand, like, if that part breaks down, then everything I believe breaks down. So I had to believe or really feel confident in that piece of it. And so I spent most of my adult life when examining and debating and re-examining my own personal philosophies, like, is that true? Like, do we have free will? Do we have agency? Are there circumstances where that can be taken away or minimized or whatever? And it kept circling back to, no, like, we have it. You can't take it away. And so we should be structuring society and culture to allow that to flourish.
Yeah, definitely. A recurring theme, I think, that comes up with most conversations about libertarianism really centers on this element of almost cynicism that exists in the part of the people that believe in more government involvement, right?
Yeah.
This idea that the government, regardless, put whatever imagery you want on it, right? The nanny state, the government's your parent or whatever. But this cynicism that, left to our own devices, we would all devolve into this just, chaotic, anarchic mess. And what's ironic is, and I would love to hear your opinion on this, but with everything that's happening, whether it be the riots in Portland or in other places throughout the country, the ethnic and racial equality issues that we have going on right now, even down to the COVID response, it really goes to show you that government's been involved the whole time, right? It hasn't fixed the problem. And a lot of us would make the argument that it's basically made it worse, right? Or maybe even been the
Yeah.
source of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I completely believe that. There isn't much that, so let me back up a little bit. I'm the fourth son of five to immigrant parents. I'm the first one in my family born here. I would say I grew up in a I wouldn't call it progressive, but a very liberal background. My father was a union guy. He truly believed in the social safety net. He taught his kids to believe in that. My first chance to vote, I voted for Bill Clinton. I voted for Bill Clinton twice. I voted for Ted Kennedy. I grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up blue.
Yeah. Yep.
So what happened? I lived a life, and I just saw I saw the disconnect. I saw why do things work this way? And hey, when government gets involved in something and it breaks down, why is the solution always more money or more government? I don't understand that. Like, no one else operates that way, but for some reason it's just sort of accepted that we'll just throw more money at it. And having lived a life and having been in business or whatever, it's like that never solves the problem. It always makes it worse. Especially introducing the money piece of it. I think that's the most corrupting aspect of it. I think the same people that want the government to come in and solve the problem and want the big budget for that, they don't understand the trade-off that comes with that. With gigantic budgets, you're inviting corruption.
Yes.
There's a big pool of money there to go after, right? So it gets seamly, and how all of that works. And so, I'm just a huge proponent and fan of things that work right, that are like well designed and work well, and just money is not always the issue. And I guess it just comes back to, we have human agency over this. And so when it comes, like, take education for instance, you can't give someone an education.
Right.
They have to take it. They have to want it. You can't give someone health. Like, honestly, you can't give someone health. Like, you can't make a 400-pound person 150 pounds. They have to do that themselves. And so why would any other sort of human flourishing be designed in such a way where someone could give it to you? Nothing, like literally nothing works that way. In every case, it's I believe that there is a social contract.
Right.
But I think a contract goes both ways. And maybe the beginning of that social contract is, I have human agency. I'm an individual. I have a responsibility to people around me to not be a slob, to not fall prey, to not do drugs,
right?
To be an upstanding citizen, to respect other people and not harm them. I think that's our responsibility. And I think everything else sort of like extends from that.
And the counterpart to that is that because you have freedom, because you have personal agency and the ability to kind of write your own script, if you make a misstep, right, you have to suffer the consequences of that decision. But I think a lot of folks will try and paint that as like the end of the story. that's the beginning of the story,
Yeah,
right? Like
absolutely.
how many
Always.
people, what's really strange is people that are really pro, centralized government or pro government overreach. Okay. And then all of a sudden they're sending and posting videos on social media about how, like, you have to fail like all these times in order to be successful, and you have to push through and all this other stuff. And you're like, your political leanings do not align with what you're putting out there in terms
All
of
the
like
time.
this,
Yeah.
inspirational stuff. I love the fact that you brought up this idea that you can't like force change or force like prosperity on someone. And you see this happen time and time again, right? One of the things I was thinking about earlier today in preparation for this was the idea of, legalization of, recreational drugs. Okay. And the question everyone has is, well, what's going to stop people from becoming like just druggies hanging out all over the place and just ruining their lives? And the answer is that, well, you have to make a decision whether you are or aren't going to do that. No one forces that stuff into your body. And more importantly, once you make that mistake, if you consider it a mistake, no one forces you to stop, right? So someone who ends up having a habit, if they end up stopping and surviving that, they do it of their own volition. Like, no matter how many times you arrest them, no matter how many times you throw them like in a rehab program or something like that, ultimately they have to make the decision to change.
Yeah.
And
And
and and
doesn't it make them better? Like, don't they become, you see it time and again where someone does overcome something like that, and the gift that they give is their ability to then relay, the stories of, this is what I went through, this is how I got through it,
yeah,
don't do what I did. It's, you, it
why don't
just,
they, here's a question, and it's kind of out of left field. Why don't they put an escalator to the top of Everest? Right, like that's the thought, right? Like, why why don't they just put an escalator in like 2/3 of the way, right, so that you get the attainment of like the last third. Okay, but a lot of people, the way that they view things in that idea, in that vein of like what government can do to kind of like make your life better or easier, or create a safety net, right? It's no longer just a safety net. Now it's literally like something that like pushes you or pulls you in a direction. But that's something that I've thought about many times. It's like
yeah.
all these great feats, like, why did they not just when Bannister ran the sub 4 minute mile, right? Like,
Hmm.
why didn't they just like, assume that he could run the first 3 laps in 3 minutes and then have him run 1 lap, right? He had to do the whole
You have
thing,
to do the whole thing.
and he had to run like thousands, 10,000 miles in order to finally run one that was sub 4 minutes. And what's crazy is after he did it, like 3 or 4 people broke it within the months right after that.
Yeah, yeah. It
You know?
became a mental thing.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
And to your point, humans are capable of amazing
Yeah.
things. And but now you gave me a quote that I thought was absolutely fantastic. I've probably seen this and just not even kind of noticed it until now. But the Charlie Munger quote, right? Show me the incentives, and I'll show you, what the outcomes are.
Yep.
And if you end up rewarding mediocrity, you end up getting a whole lot of just that mediocrity, right?
And I think we're seeing a lot of that now. So, um, you know, I don't want to make a political statement about like the riots and things like that. I think
Sure.
that. I think we can sort of separate that.
Yep.
But take those people that are in Portland, right, and are getting arrested. So
Right.
whether you believe this is police initiated or person initiated, these people are getting arrested and they're getting let go
Hmm. Hmm.
immediately. It's
Yep.
just a revolving door. And
Yep.
guess what happens? They get arrested again.
Yep.
And guess what happens? They get arrested again. Like, that's the incentive. Like, there's no incentive to stop them from behaving that way, and we're losing sight of those things. And so I hate to make the analogy and sort of say, like, when you raise a child, I don't want to equate adults with children,
Sure.
but it's a metaphor, right? So, or analogy.
Hmm.
So if your children ask for things and you give your children things, what's going to happen? They're going to ask for more
They're gonna ask for
things,
more. Yeah.
right? Like, and is it painful to say no? Yes,
Hmm.
right? but that's what parenting is all about. Like you have to, there's no way around it. You have to do those hard things. So if you want health, you have to do things that make you healthy. Like you have to want to do those.
Yeah.
If you want wealth, you have to do certain things. And I don't know at one point in my life that I began to sort of drift in that direction, but into the libertarian direction. But to me, it just seemed completely obvious just from my own personal productivity, my own personal progression through life, that I was my worst own enemy. Like I couldn't blame other people because I didn't study, or I didn't like pass this exam, or I didn't, you know, I didn't do the things that were necessary. And I recognize that. Like, it's like, if I could just do this, or if I could just behave in this way, like, put me in a corporate environment, I struggle with, keeping my opinions to myself, or saying things in a political way. And that has harmed my career.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's literally nothing in my career where I could just like sort of point the finger and blame someone else. I try to turn inwards. So wherever I haven't been, Nick, are you a billionaire? No. Well, why not? I don't know. There's something inside of me that's preventing me from reaching that, or doing that, or having that success. And so even if I'm wrong, right? Mm-hmm. I still think that is like the healthiest approach to how individuals should sort of map out their lives. Like, but I feel like it's the incentives things. I feel as though our political systems have given a lot of incentive for victimhood. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I would even say the incentives greatly exceed the opposite. Mm-hmm. So you get more status points in society if you are a victim. And so I see people like desperately seeking that out. I mean, just in the past week, I've read 2 stories of white people who have tried to pass off as black people. Yeah. Why? Why would they do that? There's an incentive there for them to do that. There's status points that they know they can get by trying to do that they can't get. And so that is really perverted, right? Yeah. To seek victimhood, to seek weakness, and to use weakness as a badge, as like, I am being held back by the man or whatever, and thinking that's like an honorable thing, when I will guarantee you, I can, if you and I like sat down and had like a deep life coaching session with someone who is like one of these victims, I will guarantee you, if we tore down their history, we could find a million examples where they could have done one thing that would have made them more productive, and they chose an easier route to go. And I saw that all the time. So it might have been college or whatever, but I remember one time I was a biology major in college. There were 2 Korean students in my class. Not only was the material hot, I remember taking a biochemistry class with them. The material, incredibly difficult, really hard stuff. They spoke no English. They got an A. Yeah. So not only did they have to learn the material, they had to freaking translate it. Right. Okay. So like, what's my excuse? Yeah. Yeah. If I didn't get an A, shame on me. Look how freaking hard they're working. And I should at least be able, if I have privilege, I should at least be able to match their effort. And so I see what they did, and I'm like, there's nothing that they did that anyone else couldn't have done. So this, falling on the victimhood sword just rings really empty to me, because I think of that story. I made a list preparing for this. There's a movie called Door to Door with William Macy. It's a true story, and it's about, I don't know if he had a mental or physical condition, but he was known at one point as like the world's greatest salesperson. Right. Right. And he went door to door.
I think I saw somewhere, was it cerebral palsy or something like that?
Something like that. Yeah. I don't remember what the ailment was. Yeah. But here's this guy who has this ailment, and he became like very elite at salesmanship and created a very, very good financial life for himself. And it's like, well, what's my excuse?
Yeah.
Like, if he can do it, like, honestly, guy with cerebral palsy
Hmm.
becomes a great salesperson, knocking door to door, selling stuff in a digital age. Honestly, if he can do that, what's preventing anyone else from doing anything?
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
effort. Like, it really boils down to that. And so that was one. Um,
I think a
yeah,
lot a lot of people look at a story like that and they say, "Well, yeah, but wouldn't it have been nice if he didn't have to struggle as much?" Like obviously he had to struggle in order to be successful despite his circumstances, right? And they say, "Well, this is the most prosperous country in probably the history of mankind, right? Why can't we afford the assets or the resources so that his struggle wouldn't have been so hard?" And I think the answer is, and it does seem a little cold, but you know what? We'll I mean, the truth is the truth. If he didn't have to struggle, would he have gotten to the same place? Right? Would he have been as great if the something was just handed to him, or even if he
no,
just had a little bit more of a head start? Um, we actually kind of suffer from. I would love to hear your opinion on this. I have this feeling that we are a victim of our own success, or rather, we're a victim of
completely.
prior generation
Yeah,
success.
yeah.
Right? Things are so easy in America that we have areas where there's difficulty, like there's food deserts in areas in the United States, okay? But for the most part, the overwhelming majority of us do not have food insecurity, right? Whether we're paying for our own grocery bill or we have WIC or food stamps or something like that. There are other countries like India where literally there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people that are almost in,
Malnourished.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're malnourished to the point where they can't find food, right? um, but look at that in so many different aspects of American life, and you're like, you've hit, I think Gary Vaynerchuk says it, you've hit the genetic and the socio-cultural jackpot if you are born or lucky to immigrate to the United States, right? Because there are a bunch of other countries where someone could make the argument it's better to do this here, it's better to do that there, but this country was founded on the idea of opportunity and improvement, and it gets abused sometimes with this phrase American exceptionalism. Well, American exceptionalism is not realized if everything is just handed to you or if you're given a head start in all of these things, right? American exceptionalism is that idea that you'll do something that's crazy that no one else has ever tried before in a new way and find a new way to do something. And you know what? 99 times out of 100, you'll fail, right? Usually catastrophically, okay, but
Yeah.
that one time you find something exceptional. That's American exceptionalism, right? We've gotten away from that. Now it's like true to that quote, that Munger quote, right? Like we almost want everyone to be mediocre. Like I think you're seeing that in real time, right?
It. I. Listen, I can't say it better than that.
Yeah.
I don't even. It's. And as a parent of a 21-year-old in college, but now doing it again with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Wow,
I think. I
good
think
for you.
so. But I can see. I can see. I'm financially better off now,
Hmm.
and it shows.
Yeah.
Right. My two little ones are much more spoiled, and I'm worried about the type of children I'm creating,
Yeah.
right? Because it gets to what your point, right? Head starts and things like that.
Mhm.
If I give them what they want all the time, that's not good. I think everyone would recognize that. And so there is a line where it's just like you need to they need to work for
Mhm.
it at some point. Like there's got to be an effort to say I'm gonna, they need to recognize if I give this effort, I'll get this reward versus I just get the reward. That's
Right.
a bad incentive to really set. And I think our culture is in the latter camp, the one that you described. I think we want to give everyone a head start. We want to give, the Everest thing. We'll put you on a helicopter or an escalator and get you 3/4 of the way up.
Yeah.
And it's empty,
Mhm.
and it does not teach you what needs to be taught. And all it does is that in the next struggle, you're not going to want to put the effort in. You're going to need someone to give you that head start again. And, I think we're seeing that now. So, I think the participation trophy
Hmm.
generation is now where we see a lot of this stuff where it's just like, gimme, 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 gimme. Like how could you not have seen that by giving kids trophies for failing, that they would expect trophies for failing all the way through their life? Like,
Right.
how could you not expect that?
Well, also look at the
And
flip side of that too. A lot of studies have shown that kids that get trophies for substandard performance, like just attendance trophies or participation trophies, um, there's a higher incidence rate of depression and other types of psychological issues that stem from that.
they
Because,
know it because they
yeah,
know it inside. It's incongruous
yeah,
with the human agency, the spirit, the individualistic spirit that we talked about, that we each have.
yeah.
There's a fire. When we're born, there's a fire born within us.
Hmm.
Okay. I'll think of it as a spiritual fire, but that fire, that flame needs to be enhanced. And so if you don't feed it, it will die.
Right.
You will snuff it out, and you can't. It's so difficult to light it back up,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I can see that,
Hmm.
because I've seen it in other parts of my life as well, where the struggle wore me down and I was ill prepared for it, and I started to fall into victimhood, and and that's happened recently as
Hmm.
well, and it had, and it was like a life coach that worked with me, that I realized that no,
Yeah.
it's me. I have some control over it, and so I really believe in the Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People,
Hmm.
when he says that for every action that occurs to you, there is a moment in time, however small, however big, and you get to decide what your reaction is
Hmm.
to that. And um, I would hate to live in a society that believes that that is not the case, that you don't have a decision to make,
Yeah.
and it's as simple as, if someone says something very insulting to you, do you punch them?
Right.
And if you think you have the right to punch them, just ask yourself the question, um, do you have the choice to not punch them? Because if you do, now you have agency. You've just admitted it. So you
Right.
didn't have to punch them.
Yeah.
And so we have that responsibility, I think. I think as human beings, why the libertarian philosophy works is because I think it starts with respect.
Yeah.
Respect for yourself. You have to start with yourself. You have to have respect that you have that agency, you have the ability, you have free will, and
Right.
then that respect has to extend to others,
Yeah.
you know and I think that can drive an entire political philosophy, which it does for me,
Yeah.
of I don't think burning down other people's properties is okay.
Right.
And guess what? I do believe they have a right to physically stop you from doing that, because
Hmm.
you have no right to do that to them.
Yeah.
And I think that for a world with 7 or 8 billion people, I think the libertarian philosophy is the only one that scales.
Yeah.
I think all other philosophies fall apart because you can't manage a heterogeneous world of 8 billion people with different religions and cultures and thoughts. Like, you can't do it unless you start with libertarian foundations. It's the only way.
Yeah, and I think you're starting to see a lot of the folks that ascribe more to like this intersectional type of perspective. They're already starting to see the breakdown of this, because there's literally an infinite number, like every single individual, and I think you made this point in your writings, like every single one of us is so individualistic, right? We could
Yeah.
be 99% like someone else, but that 1% is what makes you completely different than everyone else. It's like an interesting kind of like
I,
dichotomy, right?
I hate getting grouped with others,
Hmm.
and you can chalk it up to privilege or whatever. But
Hmm.
I have, both my parents are Italian. I have a Mediterranean background. I have, my DNA is closer towards people in the Middle East and
Hmm.
Africa
Hmm.
than people from England and Germany,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So when you group me as a block, as like Western white male,
Yeah.
like first of all, I don't get insulted, but I just think it's silly. I just think like, you know, it's just a silly to put me in that block,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
But I actually I'm closer to other people,
Yeah.
and so you can segment that further. I happen to work in an industry where I do a lot of segmentation, so I think about that a lot. I like to take big blocks and break them down into little blocks. And let's just assume though, like this intersectionality movement, let's just assume they're mostly correct.
Hmm.
Still doesn't scale.
Yeah. Well,
Still doesn't scale because you can't make political decisions based off of like arbitrary elements like
yeah.
one person's skin color is darker than another, therefore we're going to treat them a certain way versus it completely breaks down. You can't run if the what I like about libertarianism is that and what I like about like free market economics is that it allows human beings to be natural and not have to like overly process, how are we going to do this? It's you know
it's organic.
I treat myself right and I treat you with respect. Now if I'm treating you with respect and you disrespect me, I have now the right to disrespect you as
Mhm.
well. But like if we just kind of operated in that way, it all sort of fits in, the pieces of the puzzle fit in, we become a more ethical society. And I would venture to say the world has been a very violent place,
Mhm.
violent and poor,
Yeah.
all the way up to the 18th century. And then something magical happened in
Yeah.
the 18th century. And I would say, getting back to American exceptionalism, I think being the first democracy, being the first peoples that decided that individuals had these God-given rights, right? And how that spread throughout the world. I will venture to say that the wealth and the flourishing of the world is tied to that moment. That
Yeah.
was the key that kind of unlocked the secret, because before that, and in other parts of the world where they don't do this, life was and is miserable.
Right. Yeah. No, and that kind of comes back to also part of our earlier conversation. There was a spontaneity to how that came onto the scene, right? It was born out of certain levels of defiance of centralized planning and centralized kind of control of what was perceived as the individual's life and the right of the individual to choose their own path, right? And it flew in the face of literally thousands of years of other alternatives that were very top down or were
Yeah,
very centralized. It doesn't get any more centralized than a monarch. And you had tons of countries that had monarchs that obviously had a huge disparity. You want to talk about wealth disparity? I mean, huge disparity in income and wealth, right? Even look at some of the socialist, attempts throughout history. There's typically a small group of ruling class. This is the irony: is you want to talk about big disparities in wealth distribution. Well, you're going to end up with an even bigger disparity in wealth distribution. You just end up with a ton more people who are poor and less people that have
of
control of
course.
money, right? Like
Well,
dramatically less.
that's been the history of the world,
Yeah.
right? It's you have royalty, you have landowners. There's very few of them,
Hmm.
and everyone else is like literally dirt poor. They're
Yeah.
serfs, they're slaves, they're peasants. Like, and there was no route for them to get out, and
Right.
it just makes me like want to crawl through a wall when I hear people talking about the economic disparity that exists today and how it's like the worst ever. It's like, what are you talking about? Like,
Yeah. It's not even close. It's not
are
even
you are
close.
you joking? Like, poor people in this country are obese.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what do we talk? Like, poor people for the entire history of the world, poor people died from malnutrition.
Yeah.
Now they're dying from heart disease and diabetes. Like, it's a different kind of problem. And
Right.
and you know, I will tell you as well. My, I will diverge a little bit from other libertarians. I have a soft spot.
Hmm.
I do feel bad for people.
Hmm.
I'm extremely charitable. The difference is this is a voluntary thing on my part, and like the things that I look for when I'm charitable, like I don't just give my money to anyone.
Right.
I give my money to organizations where I feel like the money's actually going to be good, put to good use. And that's, I think, an extension of my political philosophy. I'm not against like tax increases or taxation at all,
Yeah.
but I'm always against tax proposals because you're just making another DMV. Like whatever it is, a healthcare, whatever, you're just making another DMV. It's just like, no, I'm not interested
Yeah.
in that. If you're going to take my tax money, spend it wisely. If you do that, I think we can avoid a lot of these problems. But just to spend money, just to spend it,
Yeah.
like this whole defund the police nonsense. We're gonna send out camp counselors to talk to them, and then we're gonna live in some utopia. It's like, what universe do you live in where that could possibly happen? Like
Yeah.
that's just so um, detached from the reality on the ground. And I think that's where libertarians really thrive, is that there's a connection to reality that exists. And I think the other political philosophies, there's a detachment from, and that would be the liberal and the conservative
Yeah.
philosophies on the other side. I feel like there's a detachment on the liberal side. I feel like there's just this really infatuation of, government's going to save us and they're going to protect us from the big boogeyman. But I think alternatively, from the conservative philosophies on, the other side, it's, business, 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 like money,
Right.
it's like they're both wrong.
Yeah.
Like both of them are looking at like these big entities to sort of like rescue the rest of us. And it's like, I don't want to be rescued. Just
Yeah.
get out of my way and get out of everybody else's way. That's all I ask.
I find it really interesting that the both majority parties, major parties, have been co-opted and set up in such a way now that it used to be the Democrat Party legitimately used to speak to middle class and poor American, at least used to speak to them. Okay, we can have a separate argument as to whether or not those policy prescriptions were actually going to do or help those people, right? But I think what's happened really within probably the last like 20, 30 years, like since Clinton, okay, since Bill Clinton, is that now both parties, it seems, are completely controlled by these top-down interests. And the grassroots organization, and I'll use these, air quotes, grassroots organizations are not grassroots organizations that have the ear to the top of these parties. The grassroots organizations are these gigantic conglomerated nonprofits, and advocacy groups that have tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. And even then, you're talking about an organization that is not speaking to the average American's needs, right? They're speaking to some higher level of whatever influence, some higher level of politicking on their own part, right? And that very dynamic is, it's damaging because you know what? It comes up time and time again. We don't have a problem between um, whites and blacks, or we don't have a problem between this group and this racial group. Okay, we have a problem between people that are authoritarian and people that want individuals to be able to be free and prosperous. That's the big dividing line right now. But it's been co-opted and
Of
sold, that
course.
message,
Yeah.
like time and time again. And it's always like, what's the story? When socialist revolutions happen, okay, after the revolution happens, who are the first people to be executed and go? It's what they call, and again, I don't use the phraseology, or I didn't come up with it, but the useful idiots, right? The people that caused all the disturbance and stuff to get the revolution to happen. Well, we don't want them around anymore because once they figure out they're getting screwed a second time, we don't want them causing a disturbance. So we got to get rid of them. So the people that are the loudest and the most violent and the most open about trying to get this, seed change to happen, typically they're the first ones to go on the tail end. They've lived beyond their useful livelihood, and that just goes to show you what that dynamic is like.
Of course. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of World War II.
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
military history, but specifically World War II, because it's just it was such a dark time in human history.
Right.
And, so it's, I'm always amazed at how much sympathy the Soviets get.
Mm.
Like, just amazed. Like,
Yeah.
it's always like the Nazis invaded Poland and they started World War II. And it's like just yesterday, I got a tweet from, I don't know if it was the History Channel or History Magazine, like, on this day in 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Poland.
Hmm.
And it's just, I've, because of that kind of stuff, I've become more like, I'm not a fascist. I'm
Yeah.
anti-fascist,
Yeah.
but I'm more anti-communist.
Mm.
And and the reason for that is that fascism is so obviously distasteful,
Hmm. Hmm.
so obvious, right?
Yeah.
But communism is dressed up in, it's lipstick on a pig. It's dressed up nicely. It's sold in a way. It's very alluring
Hmm.
to people, because I sort of fell for it. I would probably classify my father as quasi-communist,
Right.
right? Like, so he kind of distilled that down to me, and so there's an alluring element of it of, you know, yeah, we're all in this together, and if you've done a little bit better, you should give a little bit more, and all of that. And but not looking at, like, how that is sort of played out, and it plays out exactly how you would expect it to play out with those incentives in place. And I love what you just described of, like, who did they get rid of?
Yeah.
Stalin got rid of Trotsky.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Trotsky was, like, booted out of the Soviet Union, and Stalin's like, yeah, that's still not good enough. He was
Yeah.
in Mexico. He sent a headhunter down there to assassinate him.
Yep.
That
Thank you for your service, but I'm done with it. Yeah, that's basically what.
that's always how it works. And I just, so that's why, like, a lot of, like, when people see, like, my tweets or posts, like, yeah, I'm generally more like anti-communist, because I feel like I don't have to be anti-fascist.
Right.
There's so many people doing that work for me, but it's the communist parts. Like, I want to take the allure off and just say, oh my God, it's such a freaking disgusting
Yeah.
philosophy. It is all dressed up in these platitudes, and it can't hold any water. Like,
Yeah.
it literally can't and has never. And so, debating people about, like, I love debating people about the Nordic countries and how,
Mm.
like, oh, well, they're democratic socialism. And it's like, they're more libertarian
Yeah.
than you give them credit for. First of
Hmm.
all, their economies are all free market.
Yeah.
They have, like, but I think more it's the culture of the people. The people have respect for one another. And so, as much as they have, like, free healthcare and all this other stuff, it's like they chose that,
What
right?
what also
You
gets
know?
discounted about the Nordic countries, and we're kind of running up against time, so I don't want to keep you too long. But what gets kind of brushed under the rug is that the Nordic countries culturally are very homogeneous.
Yes.
Okay, when you're
Yes.
dealing with a heterogeneous population, homogeneity is it's part of the reason why fascists always have this kind of undercurrent of socialism, or maybe vice versa. But if you notice, like, there's almost always a purification thing that happens, right?
Always.
Like, we have to
Yeah.
purify the
Yeah.
people, and it's because if you have a diverse group of people, there's going to be upstarts. There's people who are going to
Yep.
question. There's people that aren't going to
Yep.
be helped by the
Can't
same
can't
system.
have that.
Exactly. And so
Can't have that.
that's why that falls apart 100 times out of 100. It falls apart unless you have an extremely homogeneous population. Well, I want to thank you very much. I appreciate it, Nick. um,
I could go all day.
yeah, I know, right? Like hours.
If COVID wasn't happening, like, we should go to the libertarian convention or whatever, because, like, you know what? I love the debate,
Yep.
and it's like, I want my ideas tested, because I
Yes.
want them. I want them to be bulletproof. So having these kinds of conversations, it's like, yeah, bring it on. Like,
I li-
I'm willing to bend my ideas.
Libertarians get a really bad rap because when you get into a group with us, we fight with each other even harder than we fight with people outside of the group. And it's because we want that litmus test of,
Yeah.
like, what actually holds water. And you know what? There are some very defined kind of pillars of the libertarian party and movement. And then there's other things that we debate on a daily basis. And that debate is important, right? First Amendment, expression,
Completely.
diversity of thought, all of those things are
Yep.
important within the party. And what's funny is how people in the major parties don't don't have an appreciation for how beautiful that is. And they're all about like, this is the party line, this is the direction we're going in, and we're like, all right, well, have fun marching to your doom. We're going to be over here having a good time. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to thank you for taking the time out. I know you got a couple things to go do. I wanted to leave with one quote. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but this is a Teddy Roosevelt quote. Nothing in the world is worth having or worth doing unless it means effort, pain, and difficulty. I have never in my life envied a human being who led an easy life. I have envied a great many people who led difficult lives and led them well. I love that quote.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, awesome quote.
And
So enjoy the weather down there in Naples, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
okay, I love it. Thank you so much.